Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I have a CEO who's a great entrepreneur, and we're going to learn some lessons about that. His name is Liran Belenzon, and Liran is in Canada. He is supported by a lovely wife, and he's got two kids, aged 3 and 5. The wife is a clinical psychologist, so she could probably give him and me some great advice. We could always do with that. So I look forward to the feedback afterwards. But Liran, welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Podcast. Great to have you on board.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Yeah. Now, you were recommended by another one of our guests, Martin at Google, who was doing a lot of work with startups. And when I asked him who he found an inspiring CEO, he said you, which is nice. Tell me the connection with Martin. What have you done together?
Yeah, so Martin works at Google or used to work at Google. I think he still works there. And Google is one of our early stage investors. And when we got to a certain scale, one of their offerings to startups as the scale is leadership support. So I got to know Martin through an engagement that we did with them in terms of training for our leadership team, how do we work better as a team. This was also during COVID, so it was obviously an interesting and complex time. So I got to work with him there, and we connected afterwards as well. Kept in touch as we were facing different challenges and kind of get his perspective. And then when he went on the journey of writing his book, he asked if we can be one of the case studies, and I obviously said yes.
Yeah, well, I've listened to his audiobook, and you are a case study. And he was very complimentary about you and the work that you've done together as part of his bonfire moment that he
Yeah,
encourages startups to have. No, I found some really good advice and tips on there. Lovely that he saw you as a case study. Um, in the business that you do, BenchSci, just explain to everybody listening, it's about 130 countries around the world that leaders are listening in, that while you won't be providing services directly for them, you are doing some amazing work with AI and some life-saving research. So just explain briefly the purpose of BenchSci.
for sure. I don't know if people are aware of how hard and complex and expensive it is to develop new drugs, but today it takes between 12 and 14 years, and it costs over $2 billion to develop a drug, and the failure rate is over 90%. And
Right.
that 90% is when you test it in humans, which is after you worked on it for 7 years. And the additional problem is that actually the productivity is declining. And one of the biggest reasons for that, the productivity of developing drugs, which basically means they're becoming more and more expensive to develop, and we're developing less of those. And one of the main reason is that simply the low-hanging fruit are gone. And the diseases that are in front of us today that we're trying to cure are much more complex than ever before. And the number one reason so many drugs fail is because we didn't fully understand, or we didn't understand correctly, the disease biology. And that's exactly where we come in. So over almost the past decade, we've been applying AI to unravel the complexity of disease biology, to understand everything that's ever been discovered about biology and how diseases work in the entire history of research, and connecting all those dots together, and then supporting the brightest scientists in the world with an AI assistant for them so they can better navigate how disease biology works. So I imagine a world anyways, where in the future, each and every one of us will have AI assistants, whether it's for doctors, accountants, lawyers, and we're building that one for scientists.
Fantastic. And I am fascinated by the whole area of AI, but as you well know more than anybody, there's so much hype that goes around it. Um, what is, in layman's terms, what do you think is the benefit of AI? I'm using, for example, ChatGPT version 4. I use it quite a bit, but I also use an app called Perplexity, which pulls in from ChatGPT and a variety of other sources when I want to know some information, and it has more real time than ChatGPT does, which it has a certain deadline. I think it's 2020. It might be 2 years ago. But this is pulling in more current stuff. What do you find it sort of is really useful for people?
I like simplifying things. So for me, probably usually everything boils down to better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
Whether you can do the same thing, but much, much faster because you have an AI assistant that should either summarize, search for you, whatever it is. There's the better piece, which is the AI produce something that is better than what you could have produced, or in a way, the combo of both, which is it maybe produced the same thing, but something that would have cost you a lot more money to produce. You can do it in a much cheaper way.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And certainly when I'm looking up information about various things, the speed with which it can give me the information, or I might want to do a bio on Liran. And so I say, please produce me a 500
Yeah.
word bio on Liran. And it will go and search through all the websites and everything. And within 30 seconds maximum, I've got a very good bio. And I could even craft it around and please make it for my podcast, Inspiring Leadership. And it will say the podcast guest will get these benefits from
Yeah.
having Liran on the podcast.
And
So
I think the interesting question is what do you do with the time you just freed or the money you have now that you didn't have before because you did something in a much cheaper way. And I think that's kind of the opportunity cost or the opportunity in as a whole.
and I think so. And also in a whole variety of different areas. My brother's a surgeon, and two of his children are GPs, or working in accident and emergency, or some critical surgery. And the ability very soon, it's probably there, but not yet seen in our GP surgeries, for the GP to have a conversation with me.
Yeah.
And while we're having the conversation, she's asked my permission beforehand, of course. It's recording what we're saying and it's typing up the notes for her. So she actually, rather than currently speaking to me, then going in and typing the notes and then looking back at me and then typing the notes, she's having a real conversation with me. And it's coming up with different causes of my particular symptoms and some potential cures and some drugs and different things that I can take, which she can then have a look through, and her AI assistant can speed up what she does and give her some of the latest things, because since she did her studies as a GP, a lot more stuff has come out about the particular disease or illness I might have, or the symptoms I might have, which is not possible for her to keep up to speed with that. I think that's really very exciting. And someone was saying as well that, what are our children going to learn at school? Because a lot of the stuff that you teach them to learn, it's pretty pointless them learning it, because they're just going to ask AI and it will tell them. So can they learn some life skills instead? I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Big question. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how to predict the future. I do know that calculators were invented, and Excel was invented, and it probably changed all of the way we do calculus and math and build models and so on, and we still need to use them. Maybe this will be the same, maybe this will be bigger, but I think as society we adapt to everything and probably push the border or the limits of what we can do with this new enabling technology.
Yeah, you remind me back at here. I'm 62, but back at doing sine, cosine, and cos, um, and maths, pure and applied, and things like this, stuff that I've never had to use or of any relevance whatsoever. I would have much rather. Can you please teach me on how to run my bank account and do a profit and loss balance sheet, and how to run a business or stay solvent, whatever it might be. Thank you for that. So the entrepreneurial experience you've been CEO now. You co-founded the business in 2016.
Mhm.
Been CEO for over 8 years,
Yeah.
and you've dabbled with a couple of other startups as well. Um, as a leader, and you're learning from others. We were talking before the show started with a couple of CEOs who are famous that you found inspiring. Who would you call out, and what qualities have you admired about them?
Yeah. And I'll just give some context maybe about the company in terms of the size and scale where we are today. So we got started in early 2016. We were four co-founders. Now we are 350 employees in the company. We are headquarters in Canada, but we're a global company. We don't have one single customer in Canada. We work with the largest pharma in the world, so I travel a lot. And we raised over $200 million to date. So my personal leadership journey looked very different when we were 4 people, 10 people, 100 people, and over 300 people. The two people or the two leaders that inspire me for different reasons, and I struggled with this a bit because I couldn't find one. And I think you take something from each and every person. It's hard for me personally to find someone, oh, this is who I want to be. I think I'm a work in progress, so it's different aspects from different leaders. The two that inspired me were Bob Iger and Jeff Weiner for different reasons.
And Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, and Jeff
Yeah,
Weiner, CEO of LinkedIn.
yeah,
Yeah, just pick out a couple of qualities. Having you've probably read their autobiographies or you've
yeah,
seen
for
what
sure.
they've done. What would be a couple of inspiring leadership qualities that you take from them and aspire to apply to what you do with your
Yeah.
350? Yeah,
So with Bob Iger, and yes, I read a lot, especially autobiographies of business leaders. So I read his book, Ride of a Lifetime, which I highly recommend.
I've read it. Yeah, yeah,
What really inspired me was his willingness to take risks. And people think it's hard work and smart work, yes, but not only. There are people who work really, really hard their entire life, but it doesn't mean they achieve professional success, anyways. I think it's a lot about the comfort and ability of taking risks. And I think that is the combo. People will say luck. I think it's very much of taking risks as well.
yeah.
So for me, with Bob Iger, it's really around the risk that, and he talks about in his book that he took when he became the CEO of Disney. And the tenure, he talks about it where he had a conversation with his wife around that the average tenure of a CEO of a corporation that size, I think, is between 3 and 4 years. And that's kind of pretty much all the time he had there. If you look at the average, so he had a conversation with his wife, and I think she gave him the advice, well, make it worth it. If you're gone anyways in 3 or 4 years, just go for it. And he made tremendous changes in Disney that made it what it is today. So I think that's one, his ability to and encourage to take risks. Jeff Weiner is a lot about his leadership style. So I read a book that he highly recommended. It's called Conscious Business, where it really talks about how you want to lead. And from simple, I'll say mindsets in terms of are you a knower, are you a learner? Um, and that really impacted me a lot in terms of how I work with my team. And there's this really great YouTube series by Y Combinator called How to Start a Startup, and he was interviewed there. And this was in Stanford, and he was asked by one of the students, "How do you tell your team what to do?" or something along those lines. And he started laughing. He
How
said,
do you what? How do you
How do you tell your team what to do?" And he
how
started
do you
laughing. He
tell your
said, "I
team
don't
what to
tell
do?
my team how to do anything. I need to convince them." Um, which kind of talked a lot about his style. And I think it's true when you get to a certain scale and you get a certain level of talent, you don't tell people what to do. I don't see anyone I work with as work for me. I see them as my colleague. I see us as work together. I hate when people say I work for you. I'll never use that language. I think we work together. Sure, I have a certain set of responsibility and accountability also for their actions, but I see us as a team. And I also want to encourage that culture where we debate and make sure we're making the right decision. And I think that comes with a certain style of leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, there's very much one of the earlier guests was Stephen Covey, who I enjoyed having on here, and also Captain David Marquet, who David wrote Turn the Ship Around and Leadership as
Mhm.
Language, which are two great books. If you haven't read them, I recommend them. But Stephen, son of Stephen Covey, but this is Stephen M.R., his father wrote this one of the early books on self-development, which is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and it's been around for 50 years.
Yeah.
It's still a must-read book, I think. But his son's put together with a great team, and I had another co-author with him who was fabulous as well. Trust and inspire, this idea of moving from command and control to trust and inspire, to elevate and empower people. And I was talking to a leader just earlier in one of the coaching sessions, and he goes, look, I haven't got time to trust and inspire my people. I've been told I've just got to get on and do it all myself. You know, the firm that's bought me, they want me to get stuck in there and turn the sales around, and you haven't got time to trust and inspire others. You've got to do it all yourself. And I said, well, that's a very short span of the time in your business, because you will not survive doing it that for long. If you have to save it from a disaster by personally getting involved, a bit like if there's a fire in the building,
Yeah.
that you might say, follow me. We're going through the smoke and this is the way out, rather than what does everybody think and which is the right exit? Anybody got any
Yeah.
ideas? And let's have a chat about it. There are few moments when that happens, but an organization doesn't really do very well for itself when it's too much command and control, which is yesteryears. What's your thoughts on trust and inspire versus command and control?
I think what you said is very interesting, which is something I agree with, which is it's context dependent. I don't think leadership is, hey, this is how you lead, and it's exactly like that 24/7. That would be very, very easy. There is what's your default, right? And there's also what's the context of certain situations that you have to act in a different way to succeed, and for the organization to succeed, for you to succeed. And again, depends. I think same thing in life, right? It just depends on that situation. I think even when you raise your kids, like you said, okay, there's times to talk and there's time, oh my God, you're in danger and I need to pick you up and move you over there. So I think it's very much dependent. I think it's also dependent on who you work with and so on. And like you said, it's also what's the time frame of that, and is this the default, or hey, here's the context and you're clear about it. This is the situation. This is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to play out. It's not going to be like that in the long run. This is why I'm doing this, and let's go. I think that's fine. Um, but I think it kind of goes back to what is the default state, and how you manage things on 80% of the time or 90% of the time.
Yeah, I think that's context dependent is very true. And as we were discussing earlier, there's some sort of universal truths that are useful in all types of leadership. Just like I've recently come back from an 11-day silent meditation retreat with an underpinning of Buddhist teaching called Vipassana, insight meditation. And as I read a lot around Buddhism before I went, I'm not a Buddhist, but I found there were some universal truths which I take with me. One is impermanence, the universal truth of impermanence. Things rise up and they pass away, and change is inevitable, and things will be constantly changing in your business. And to not be surprised by that. And the other one is that much unhappiness is caused by either craving or people trying to aversion from something. So either they want things to be, if they're good, to stay good, or if they're not good, they're craving for to have that car or that watch or whatever it is. And of course, we've set up a whole marketing monster, which tries to encourage Liran and Jonathan that they're not happy with just the one watch. So you've got to have 5 watches, all of different colors, or you know, the car you've got, once you've got this car, then you'll be happy. And
Yeah.
of course, it's all fleeting and it's an illusion. And so that's the problem with craving. And then the aversion is that you know you need to have the difficult conversation with a member of your team, but you know it's difficult, so you avoid it. But actually, that leads to unhappiness and aversion of dealing with difficult things or facing in to the unpleasant things. And I think I take those promise, and they're very relevant for business and for leadership scenarios I'm sure you've faced, Liran. What's your thoughts?
Again, context dependent. I'm at a space where we're a startup, right? It's not a lifestyle business or my company. I'm one of the people who founded it, fortunate to do that. And I have a job. And that job is being a CEO, and I have to earn that job every single day. And a part of starting a startup is that there is no kind of end state, and the goal line is always, always, always moving. So my job is to maximize the company. So I'm, I guess, in constant craving mode, no matter what, and always will be because that is the job. Um, so that also obviously fuel our innovation and so on. So I'm okay with that. I also think for some extent it's fine to have it in your personal life as long as you're happy with what you have. There's nothing wrong with working towards something bigger, also in your personal life, as long as you're happy with what you have. But in this specific role, I can never be complacent or happy with what we have. It's always around what's next. And that, but that's just, I think, a situation you put yourself when you start a startup.
Yeah, and I think,
The
sorry,
No,
go
go
on.
ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say to manage the concept, it isn't saying that we should ever be complacent or just passive and just doing
Yeah.
nothing and sitting with equanimity, which means you are more able to cope with the reality of what's going on. But I think it is very important that we don't delude ourselves. And that's why I always do with the CEOs I coach, I always do 360 feedback. Because there was one I'm just starting a 12-month program with him, and I said, in the proposal, there is the 360 from 20 people. And he goes, yeah, I'm not going to be very comfortable about that. I said, I know, but actually I'm not going to delude you and I that I believe your hype. You'll tell me how wonderful you are and you're great, but we could collude and
Yeah.
both, yeah, you're a great CEO, you're fantastic, but be utterly unaware of the perception of the strengths and the areas that he needs to develop and his impact on others. That unless you are honest with yourself and you are alert to the reality of how others perceive you, you will be deluded, as we see in many of the parliament in the UK or politicians in Canada or in America, particular famous people there who are wonderfully delusional. And we had Liz Truss, who's even to this day, having been prime minister for, I think, less days than a cabbage, or was it a lettuce, lasted longer than she did in, I think, 49 days or something. And she still couldn't see it. Anything to do with her failure was anything to do with her. It was always
Yeah.
everybody else was at fault. So
Yeah.
I think you're right with what you say, and it doesn't stop us having the ambitions to do well and strive to achieve things, but just recognizing that there's a difference between success and happiness. Success is getting what you want.
Yeah.
Happiness is wanting what you already have. But that doesn't stop you still trying to better your
Yeah.
family and bring more
Yourself.
income
Yeah.
into your family, but not to be a workaholic and not to be addicted to certain things which you crave all the time, and then it doesn't give you enough, like a drug, and you need more of it before, and so and
Yeah.
you lose track of what really matters, which is family and health and well-being and a sense of fun.
Yeah, I reflect a bit as you say this because, and again, this is a specific context, I think, of starting a startup. You kind of have to be on the extreme of a lot of the things you just mentioned. And I would even argue you need to be delusional because everybody else thinks you are when you get started. It was like, hey, I have no experience, and we're like four people who have never done anything, but we're going to build this multi-billion-dollar company that's going to solve this crazy problem that no one has ever solved, and we're going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to do this, and yada yada yada. It is a very delusional thing to say when you get started. But you have to be in a way a bit naive and delusional to be a founder and to start a company at scale. And there's nothing I love more than my family. It's important to me. And that said, a lot of the time I'm not there. I'm traveling nonstop. I'm on the road. I'm working, and it's not because that's all I want to do. That's a responsibility I have also towards them. So I wish I could get to that level of, I really believe that. Let's say it this way: if you want to do extreme stuff, you have to be a bit extreme. And maybe that's not going to be permanent for forever. And what I've learned over the years, and this is something I've been putting to action for a while, is it's many times I operate here, and that's just the demand on me professionally. But there are times, not all the time, there are times when it's here, and I've learned to capitalize when it's here.
Yeah, and just to
And
explain for people listening, here means very high, and the other
yeah, yeah,
here is a little
it's
bit lower.
lower.
If you're
I mean,
not
like
watching this on video,
normal. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it's normal. But I've learned to capitalize on that and be okay. And that's hard. Of not going 180 miles an hour every single hour, but knowing, okay, I'm in a traffic jam. If there's an allergy, I can actually slow down for the next week or 2 weeks, and that's okay. And one of the best advice I got is actually whenever don't plan. Whenever you can take a vacation day, you take it. No matter what, even if you don't need it, it doesn't matter. And those are some things I do to kind of help manage everything because um, I, I was 30 when we started the company, and that's also an age where you usually start your family. So I also had two young kids throughout this process, and I see having three jobs in my life, which is I'm a husband, I'm a dad, and I'm a CEO. And it's very important for me to be there for my wife and for my kids. And then doing all of that is very hard.
yeah, I think this is a great topic. And if I look back on many of the entrepreneurs and CEOs and successful leaders or generals in the military, I think those who've reached the highest rank or success, if it's to do with financial income, which some people see that as success, and I question whether that is success, but that's a whole story in itself. Many of them are dysfunctional. The functional people are very happy just to middle along, just do the day job, look after the kids, have a bit of sport, keep fit and healthy. They
Yep.
don't crave for that. But the ones who really want to make a difference, I wouldn't say they're delusional. I'd say that some would think they are. They're visionary. They have an
Yeah.
incredible dream, goal, aspiration, which nobody else has thought of. And that's what makes a huge difference. They think slightly different. I'm listening to Benjamin Franklin's biography by the guy who did Elon Musk, and
Yep.
also was Walter Isaacson, and it's fascinating. And that he thought of lightning conductors, and he also thought of putting oil on water long before anybody else thought of that. And he had these strange ideas that people thought were really odd, but they worked. And I think so. You've got to think differently. You've got to have great hopes and aspirations, and you also have to take people with you. There's a very good video, The Lone Nut. If you haven't seen it, there's a little video. Just type in Lone Nut on YouTube, and it's like some music festival going on, and it's about starting a movement. And firstly, you've got the lone nut, who's one guy. He's just jigging away, and everybody in the audience is just sort of like watching this guy on the grass dancing around on his own. They just think it's a bit of a nutter. And then nothing really would happen at that stage. But then if he gets like another guy comes and dances with him, and then a third, and soon there's like this gathering of about six or seven, and then everybody gets into it. And there's this moment, a bit like being, as you were, an entrepreneur starting it, you're the lone nut. And then you find three other guys who wanted to found it with you, and you have some things that don't work. I mean, as you say, look, there's 90% failure rate, 12 to 14 years, 2 billion to develop a drug. So many of them have failed, just like
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. So many, I meet so many who have succeeded, but perhaps I should do a podcast with all those leaders who've been utter failures and no one's ever heard of their business or what they've done, because there's huge learning there. It's the sort of survivor bias that you get, just like the winners in the wars. They write the history and tell you the story about how they did. We don't really get many books written by the Nazis about how they lost. But thank God the winners hopefully are well on the side of doing the right. We don't know, but there's too many at the moment going on where the winners are not very good. Let's talk about experiences that have shaped the leader that you are today, because you've had a lot of experiences that have shaped you into the entrepreneur you are today. So tell us a bit about your life story growing up
Sure.
and the leader you are now.
Sure. So I guess I'll share what I think kind of shaped me. So my grandma, she passed away a few years ago. She was a Holocaust survivor. So she was a concentration camp as a kid. I think she was 8 years old, lost her parents. And she with her side of the family immigrated to Israel in the 70s. And my dad, my parents didn't meet, they met in Israel, but my dad's family also immigrated. This was from Soviet Russia.
All right.
So sorry, from the Soviet Union, in the 70s when it was really hard to leave. So they had to leave all of their belongings behind. They basically came to Israel with $100 each. So that's kind of my roots, or since I can remember them, in terms of risk taking, immigration. I'm actually third generation that immigrated. So my grandparents, my parents, and myself. So I was born in Israel, but immigrated to Canada. So I think all of those aspects. And if you look at entrepreneurship, I was at the conference a few years ago, and I heard Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, say something that immigration and entrepreneurship are very similar, because it's basically people that are pursuing a better future and taking a big risk to do so. And we talked about bringing things to fundamentals, so those two are very similar to me.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, basically born and raised in Israel. Um, my father worked really hard his entire life. My mom worked as well, of course. My dad, or I remember him being away a lot, working very long hours, sometimes crashing at the office. He also lost his job after 20 years and he didn't even tell us as kids. And immediately after, went on and started his own company and his own business. So I think I grew up in an environment of, I guess, risk taking, if you look at the immigration story, and also very, very hard work.
Yeah.
And those two, I think, are a big part of me. Also, growing up in Israel, you were talking about being direct and so on, as it's a big part of the culture. So I think I'm okay with that as well. And it's a way it's an advantage here. That as well. I was enlisted to the army, to the IDF when I was 18 till I was 21. I had the privilege of being an army commander. I wasn't a combat soldier, but I was a commander. So got a lot of operational experience there at the age of 18 till 21. And after that, before I started college or university, it's very common in Israel for I don't know if I could call those kids or not, but for I guess kids when they're 21, 22, after they get released from the army and finish their tour, to go and travel somewhere around the world for a year or two. So I did just that for a shorter period of time, roughly 4 months. I went to Southeast Asia, and on a minibus there, I met someone. We'll get back to that, how that influenced my future, but I met someone um, who is my wife now, and she's from Canada. But I met her there on a tiny minibus in the middle of nowhere. And we didn't see each other for 3 years after that. And in the meantime, went back to Israel, got my law degree and a BA, started a business or startup during that time. We got to roughly $2 million in revenue in the first year, but since after that, it all went downhill. We're actually a victim of cyber terrorism that really impacted our growth as everything kind of clicked and moved up into the right. And I did that. And then when I was 26, the same girl I met on a minibus when I was 23 in Southeast Asia, in Laos, we got reconnected. She came to Israel for a visit, and then we did long distance for 2 years between Tel Aviv and Toronto. And I think it goes back to risk taking, going for it, and so on. And then after 2 years, I finished my degrees in Israel, my law degree and my BA. I sold the company and I moved to Canada to be with her. And I always wanted to do an MBA. So that was also kind of how I entered Canada as a student and with a student visa. And I got my MBA at University of Toronto. And what I knew for sure when I came here and got my MBA is that there's one thing I never ever want to do again, which is entrepreneurship and startups, because the experience of my first company was just so brutal and stressful. Because, and it's different now, but I guess we started as we didn't have any investors when we got started. So I was the guarantor for the company personally, and I was 25. And it's a bottomless pit in terms of how much, if things go bad, how much money you personally can owe and what has been for your future. So it's very different from obviously at this scale where you don't guarantee you're not a guarantor to the company. So that was a very stressful experience, and I did it with my best friend. Lots of first time mistakes, tons. We can probably talk for 5 hours just on those. But what I knew for sure, I never want to do that again because that was not something that brought me not just in terms of joy, but any meaning.
Just staying with it for
And
a second, I was just thinking
yeah,
of being a guarantor and how dangerous it is. I remember we had someone that my wife knew who was an interesting character. I'm not quite sure we could fully believe everything she said, but anyway, she came up with a particular scheme of something that she needed, which she claimed she had cancer and needed to wear a special helmet, which was going to treat her cancer, and uh, and that could we be a guarantor for this very expensive device? As it was, we said no at the time. We realized it was a scam, but time and again, people I've known have got caught in that. I got deceived in buying property in Cyprus by fraudsters, and then you find fraudsters are involved in fraudsters, and then a legal lady, a Cypriot lady, was going to help the team of about 30 of us who'd been defrauded by these Cypriot fraudsters. and she was a fraudster too. Is that it's almost like the sharks start feeding, and there's a
Yeah.
feeding frenzy, and they know there's these gullible people around. So yes, anybody listening, do not, unless you really have to, be a guarantor for anybody, unless it's
Yeah.
your personal family, and even then, they ought to take responsibility themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, good
So
point. Okay, and what a story. And then here you are with your business.
yeah, so
Mm.
I came here, MBA, never want to do this again. And then there was a course that I took at Rotman, which is University of Toronto's business school around entrepreneurship. Don't know why I did it. I just did that. And a part of the course, it's interesting. It's a startup accelerator or an incubator where you meet a bunch of really smart scientists or engineers and people. They're super technical, and they pair them with MBA students. And the MBA students basically take a scientific project and figure out how do we make this a business. And that is the course.
Wow.
And I was one of those, and actually was volunteering there at the time to kind of boost up my resume, which was non-existent, moving from Israel to Canada, and took a lot of unpaid jobs as well to do that. And I met this three other founders. They were working on something I've never heard about in my life. That was super fascinating, and I got hooked. So we had our last $2,000 in the bank account, and I spoke to my wife. I actually had a job lined up, and I was like, "Hey, this pays nothing." My wife was a student at the time as well. Well, she was doing her PhD in psychology, and decided to go for it, and end up joining them as one of the co-founders and the CEO. And here we are today.
Wow.
That's my life story.
Wow. Well, what a story. And as you say, you're one of the ones who've succeeded up to this point. But of course, there's many hurdles you've got to get through. And I wish you every success in what's coming up. Let's do sort of whistle stop tour through a few thoughts.
Yeah,
Darkest moment in your life and
yeah,
what it taught you.
yeah,
Talked already about the getting perspective from your grandmother being a Holocaust survivor and being in
yeah.
a concentration camp, losing her parents when she was 8. What has happened to you? I don't know whether it be a business experience or a personal life experience that you've learned the hard way from a really tough experience. What would you call out?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing I got from my family's perspective. So it's hard for me to be down and hopeless and think my problems are actually big problems. Because for me, as long as everybody's healthy, I don't have any problems, and everything is something I can deal with.
Yeah,
Professionally, what was really hard is actually when I moved here. I was, I would say, relatively successful in Israel. Nothing was ever kind of too hard for me. If I set a goal, I achieved it, whether if it's school or outside of school. And I never changed, and I would say I would never faced professional adversity. And then when I moved here, it was so different. And here being Canada, because the culture is so different, the language is so different. Everything I accomplished back in Israel didn't really count here. I changed also, I had a law degree, I never practiced, I had a BA. It doesn't really matter here. I didn't have work experience here. And when you go somewhere and you do an MBA, they do a really good job marketing. Meaning this how much money you're gonna make, and this how many job offers you're gonna get, and so on and so on and so on. And that's very false. Because the way it even generates those stats is by people who actually want to report that. And who do you think wants to report that? The people who are successful. So I had certain expectations, and it was very hard when I moved here. Very hard. Culturally, I had to change a lot. The language wasn't what it is today, and that was 10 years ago. So my darkest moment or my toughest moment was when I was actually applying for a summer job. And I was pretty much banking on that because I had certain financials to make this work. And I was banking on making some money over the summer, and I could not get a job. Like, and that never happened to me in my life. I got probably like 30 or 40 rejections, and no one wanted to hire me, not even for unpaid jobs. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And at this moment, I'll never forget it. It's that was kind of professional rock bottom for me. I was sitting in my living room with my wife. I think we were married at that time. We're engaged. Probably, I think we're no, we were engaged, about to get married. And I was like, why did I do this to myself? Like, why did I come here? What's going to be with me? No one wants to hire me. No one wants to give me a job. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that was very hard for me because what I do professionally and who I am professionally is a huge part of my life and my identity. and not feeling I can add any value or no one seems to find me as valuable was very, very difficult. But you do what you do. You pick yourself up. You don't quit. You keep going. I took an unpaid job for roughly 4 months. And as a result, I was actually able to secure two paid job offers. And then I threw them away to go and do BenchSci.
Well, well done on that. And you remind me of wonderful, long past now, but Earl Nightingale was a newsreader in America, and he talked about the wisdom that he'd learned. One of the early people who shared wisdom on personal development, and this idea of in the Great Depression, so many people were desperate because there was just no jobs. And they said, no one will give me a job. No one will give me a job. I've tried everywhere. I've sent my resume everywhere. And, no one's giving me a job. And this one guy who was always had a job. And he said, what was the secret? And he said, the secret was very simple, that he, rather than thinking someone would give me a job, I went out, and in the days before we had anything like well, AI or Google or the internet, he researched about 2 or 3 companies and really went to the library and asked a lot of people about those companies, talked to people who worked in the company, found out about all their problems, and he got in touch with the CEO and said, I have some solutions to some of your problems. I'm aware of some of your problems, and I would love to have a coffee with you and share some suggestions on how you might overcome some of the top 3 problems that you have. And the CEOs always gave him time to have a coffee with them. And he would lay out what he understood to be their major problems. And the CEOs go, you got it exactly right. How did you know that? He said, well, done some research. And he said, what are your suggestions? Well, I propose these approaches to it. And he said, would you let me come and work with you for a month for free? And if you find it useful, hire me. They always did. Because he really targeted to
Yeah.
actually be a solution to their problem rather than give me a job.
Yeah.
He made himself, and of course it sounds so simple and so easy, but in those days, that ability to do that was quite exceptional. Let's do a whistle stop tour around the Inspiring Leadership Campus with 2 or 3 of the points. Moral quotient, morals and integrity. So lacking in our politicians these days, but so desperately needed for leaders in organizations, particularly when you look at some companies, particularly in Britain and America, who've hyped up, I've forgotten which company it was, but it hyped up, it had all these solutions to scientific problems, and it was all built on complete sham, and everybody knew that it wasn't going to be able to do what the female CEO was claiming it was going to do. We'll keep the name of the company out, but I think you know the one I mean. What did you learn when you let your own values slip? Because you clearly have very strong values, but
Yeah.
all of us, I've let mine slip. What have you learned? If there's a top tip for people listening that you've learned when you let your values slip, what would it
Yeah.
be?
So maybe I'll give you the opposite answer. But luckily for me, I haven't let my values slipped on the integrity piece. Um, but what I've learned from it though is when I didn't and I actually did the hard thing, the outcome was so much better than if I wouldn't have. And I've been in situations where it was great. I didn't have to make a call that I did and disclose certain things that I did. Um, but I decided to do it anyways because, and then this is really how I see so much of this. It's, it's about a partnership between you and the other person, and it's about building a relationship and trust. Going back to the scam examples you had before, the people I work with, I have to work with them. It's not a transaction. And even if it was, I wouldn't do it as a person. But every one of those moments is also an opportunity to build trust. And that's kind of how I see it from an integrity perspective. And I'm thinking about specific situations in my head where I can't disclose them, but there was certain information that put a big deal at risk, very high risk, whether it's an investment and so on. And I didn't have to disclose it. And I knew that by disclosing it, I'm putting that entire transaction at a big risk. But I also knew if I'm not going to disclose it, I'll get the transaction, but afterwards I have to deal with the relationship. And it's just not who I am as a person. So every time I did that, and maybe I just got lucky, the outcome was so much better if I didn't disclose what I disclosed or follow that, because it builds so much trust, which I think is rare for people to have so much integrity, and not just say they have integrity, but actually act upon it.
Yeah, the people judge you on what you do, not what you say, and fine
Yeah.
words don't cut it really. Um, One of my favorite authors is Ryan Holiday, who does a lot of work on the Stoics. I'm a big Stoic philosopher by practice rather than by knowledge. And his latest book is called Right Thing, Right Now,
Hmm.
and is very relevant and fits with what you've been saying. We're coming towards the end of our time, which is such a shame because there's so many questions. But a couple of questions before we wrap up nicely. Health quotient. How do you keep yourself healthy? What's your top tip for
Yeah.
physical health and
Yeah.
mental as a CEO?
So this actually goes back to one of the best advice I ever got. You might not like it, but one of the best advice I ever got around doing this. So I was at this fireside chat in the audience a few years ago, and there was a CEO of a public company, and he was asked about his schedule. And he was basically talked about 30 days, how he's out of the country for 27 days of those. And I raised my hand and asked him, "Hey, like, how do you stay married with your schedule, and how do you stay at that?" And he said, listen, there are five things in life: family, health, work, hobbies, friends. He said, pick three. And it's funny, but I also followed out. So for me, it's family, work, health, and everything else is a bonus. And again, context dependent, time in my life, young kids, company scaling, hyper growth. It might change in the future, and I can slip in the fourth one. But health wise, I've learned that maybe I can't work as much as I used to before, I guess, having kids, but I can achieve as much, if not more, than I used to. And staying healthy and clear in my head is something that's very important or is very vital for me. And I saw a podcast by Joe Rogan a few months ago, and he talked about it, which, pardon my French, he said everyone should go and lift really heavy shit every day. Because as humans, we build so much up inside of us. We just need to let it out. So for me, I go to the gym in the morning and just I lift as heavy things as I can every single morning. Just let everything out so I can be clear and calm and be the best husband and dad and CEO I can be every single day. I've learned that for me is very important. So
Yeah,
I try and work out 4 or 5 times a week. I wake up at 4:45 every day, and I try to eat healthy. This one I'm not doing as good a job on, but I try and eat healthy as much as possible.
I like it. I like it. No, I'm happy with that one. Family, work, and health, and hobbies and friends are nice to have. And later in life, friendships become very important,
Sure.
and the community. But certainly, when you're at that bottleneck of growing family, I've got three grandchildren, or a third one about to appear, and they're all the same age as yours. My four children, they're all married now. Um, but there is this bottleneck when you're trying to
Yep.
grow your business, you've got small children, maybe also your parents are ailing and they're
Yep.
getting ill. It all seems to happen at the same time, and you haven't got enough money. You have
Yep.
the money later on in life, but you need the money now. So yeah, it's a bit of a bottleneck. Let's go down to your 2 minute top tip. So would you kind of say who you are, as
Mhm.
this is a standalone piece, stay who you are, tell us what you're the CEO of, and very briefly what your business does, and then share a practical leadership tip that would be useful to the audience as they listen to it.
Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Liran Belenzon. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of BenchSci. At BenchSci, what we do is we apply AI to unravel the complexity of disease biology so we can help the smartest scientists in the world develop better, faster, and cheaper drugs for patients, and hopefully accelerate a process that takes a very long time and has a very, very high failure rate. Our company is roughly 350 people. We started 8 years ago and we raised over $200 million. Some tips and some things I've learned along the way, and maybe what I'm trying to do most these days, especially as the company gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think staying calm is very, very, very important, because when things are smaller, you are aware of pretty much everything that's happening and all the problems. But the problems are usually not all of them are very big. But when you get bigger and bigger and bigger, the problems you are aware of, and you know less things, but the problems you are aware of are usually existential or very big. And I would argue that just staying calm is the most important thing you can do, not only so you can solve the problem, but also supporting your team so they can solve that as well. The second maybe piece of advice that kind of stuck with me, and we mentioned earlier, is deciding if you're a learner or a knower, meaning a knower kind of knows it all, and a learner is curious and wants to better understand or seeks to understand, and check their ego at place as well. I think it's all pretty much related. And my third piece of advice is don't be scared to take risks. I think we talked about it also a bit in this podcast, which is it's not only about hard work and great work ethic. You can have those, but if you're not willing to take risks, then I don't know how far you're going to get.
What great advice, Liran. Thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership Podcast. It's been a real privilege having you with us, sharing your experiences. And we wish you and BenchSci, your team that you're the CEO of, every success. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for having me.